Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Ramos. I'm a journalist at Cannareporter. It's a news media outlet based in Portugal, but since it has translation into 8 languages, we actually have right now readers in more than 180 countries all over the world. So I would like to introduce the guests of this panel. Dorien Rookmaker. She's a member of the European Parliament from the Netherlands. Cyrus, a member from the European Parliament from Malta. And Kenzi Riboulet-Zemouli is an independent analyst. We are missing Mikulas Peksa. Is already in London but not arrived yet, so hopefully he will arrive. I want to apologize. I'm not feeling very well today, so I asked Kenzi if I pass away on stage, please help me. I hope I don't need him. No, I got him nervous. So I hope this will be very easy conversation. I would start with Dorien. Last year, at the European Parliament, you create this group and sent an open letter to 705 members of the European Parliament to join you to create a more human rights-based politics related to cannabis. And we invite them to join your group. How many of them actually joined the group, and how is the current situation of the work of this group?
Well, I don't have the actual number, do you? I still have in my head 5, but I know there are more. And there are joining more and more MEPs our group. So, of course, it's like we heard in the previous discussion. For politicians, it's a tricky subject. But we're looking at it, well, let me explain how I look at it. I think it's very strange and odd that we are looking at cannabis and the use of cannabis quite differently than the use of alcohol. Mm-hmm. And I think it would solve many problems if we could regulate cannabis like we do with alcohol. There are already rules and regulations for alcohol, so there's no need for inventing the wheel again. And it's good to have this discussion within the European Union, how to go about it. And we have several initiatives now. One of them is from Malta. We have the new legislation in Germany that's almost now done, and it's going to be implemented. But I think it's a little bit strange and weird that these are such difficult regulations if we compare them to alcohol. I can't imagine that you should form clubs or groups within a country to be able to have a glass of wine, and that you're restricted to 4 glasses of wine in a month. So I don't really understand what's going on right now. And I think it's really good that we have this discussion within the European Union. I know in Spain there are several developments. Of course, we have Malta. In Czechia, it's going into the right direction, I believe. So I expect a lot of more politicians within the European Union to join us in the next couple of months and years, especially because next year there will be the European elections. And as I've been a member of parliament since 2020 now, and I've seen how politicians work within the European Parliament, and they're looking for subjects with which they can stand out and communicate with the voters. So for the sector here, it's very important to know that there are 705 European politicians in Europe looking for a subject that makes them stand out. And you could, well, I would say, use them for your own purpose and your own objectives. So that's...
Is it easy to talk about cannabis at the European Parliament? Because I come from Portugal, and politicians usually say that it's not easy to talk about cannabis at the Parliament because it's like a taboo. Is this still the situation at the EU?
Well, it depends. It depends on, I think, the situation that you're in. For an arrived political leader, it is probably a little bit tricky. But for me, as an independent politician, it's not that difficult at all. When I was 20, I had in the Netherlands a coffee shop. I was a coffee shop owner, so I know what I'm talking about. And I don't, and of course I smoked pot and weed, I did. And I don't feel any shame that I did so. I don't want to hide it. I don't do it anymore. I stopped smoking when I was going to college because the combination of making exams and smoking pot was difficult for me. But for some people it isn't. So, you know, I think people should be in charge of what they are taking, what they're taking in, whether it's alcohol or cannabis or chips or whatever, or meat or no meat, vegetarians or not. This is their own responsibility. And I talk to my political colleagues, and they, most of them agree with me when I'm talking on a one-to-one basis. I think you can relate to this experience. But what they also ask me to do is not tell anybody, because they are a little bit afraid of being open about it. And this is something, I think this is a big problem of our political system right now, that we have career politicians that are thinking about their obligations and their family, and of course this is logical, it makes sense, but it makes them a little bit cowardly. And we need leaders, I think, in the European Parliament, people who are not afraid to speak out and take charge. And as we've seen in the previous sessions, if we legalize cannabis, this would solve a lot of problems and issues. People could, for instance, now in the Netherlands even, if you work in a coffee shop, you cannot have a mortgage. It's very difficult to open up a bank account because of anti-money laundering regulations. These are European regulations. And I think if we have to take into account that if we criminalize a lot of people within our society, of course this comes with a price. And it makes no sense in doing so, because I do think that pot smokers or people who use cannabis are not a problem at all in our society. And maybe you want to add something to it?
And Mikulas just arrived. Mikulas, welcome. Thank you. Dorien, last question, and since we are talking about the Netherlands, it's a country that it's a little bit out of the box in the rest of Europe. Many people think that cannabis is legal in the Netherlands, but it's not exactly like that. Do you think that the Netherlands would function like an example to the rest of Europe, or it's better to have a different approach?
I think it's very important that the Netherlands take the next and the last final step. And this means legalizing the growing of cannabis. And this is very important, I think. I do think that the Dutch situation, the situation in the Netherlands is quite good. Because it's no problem for people to use cannabis in the Netherlands at all. But of course, as a coffee shop owner, former coffee shop owner, I do recognize that if you want to buy your cannabis to sell it to consumers, you are trespassing the law. And this, of course, this comes at a risk. And this risk also gets people who are growing cannabis in large quantities or selling that in large quantities. Well, there are some criminals involved. Well, people get criminalized if they do so. So this is a problem, and this is something I think Europe shouldn't take an example from. But the legalization, in the sense that we do not enforce law, I think is a good thing. Then you can see that if people use cannabis on a regular basis or not on a regular basis, but if they do so, if they want to, it doesn't give any problems. So I think the situation in the Netherlands generated a lot of data that the European Union can use, and data that for politicians are welcome to get a little bit of reassurance that if you legalize cannabis, this won't be the end of the world. And can I add,
Sure.
yes, because I sat here the whole morning and I listened to a lot of speakers, and I thought, well, we are thinking about how we can make Europe or governments in general legalize cannabis, because I think all of us here think this is a good idea. But we don't know how, and politicians are a little bit scared, to put it politely. There is in the European Union an instrument that you can use as a sector or as an individual, and this is called the Citizens' Initiative. A Citizens' Initiative is a political instrument in the European Union. You have to state what you want. In this sense, you could state, for instance, that you want cannabis to be treated like the same as wine or alcohol. Now, if this is your statement, you have to ask the European Commission if your initiative can be acknowledged by the European Commission. And if it does, and it probably will if you meet the standards and the rules, then you need to organize 1 million signatures in 7 countries, European countries, and then you force the European Commission to go ahead with the next step in legalization. So this is not a fairy tale. This is not something that you cannot do. There have been in history now from the European Citizens Initiative 100 European Citizens Initiatives, and the 100th is now on the way. This is about connecting high-speed rail, connecting capital cities in Europe by high-speed rail. So the legalization of cannabis could be the 101st Citizens Initiative, and in this way we can really make a big step forward, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dorien. Kenzi, before I go to Malta and the Czech Republic, you are an independent analyst, and you have a lot of work already done investigating and researching the laws and the conventions. You wrote a brief where you said that it is possible to legalize cannabis under the 1961 United Nations Convention. How is this possible?
Well, thank you for having me in this panel. It's possible under the 1961 Convention, which is the main treaty, international treaty regulating cannabis. It has very strong provisions on illicit cannabis, but then it has some provisions that allow countries to develop licit cannabis for either medical uses or for industrial uses. And under industrial uses, the treaty is called it non-medical use. You can regulate it, and it covers both hemp and recreational cannabis. So that's a way to go under the international treaty. And the interesting point is that in EU law, this international treaty is part of EU law. It's embedded into EU law. So
many people have this maybe a wrong idea that it's not possible to legalize under this convention, like, and they even might say that Uruguay and Canada violated this convention to legalize cannabis. How do you see this question?
Yeah, I'm afraid Canada and Uruguay are violating the 1961 convention because they didn't properly frame their legalization under this particular provision for the legalization of non-medical industrial use. So by not doing it properly, it's a question of details, legal details. They are actually violating the convention. But the good news is that they can fix it with some just language and some statements declaring that they are placing themselves under this provision. It's Article 2, Paragraph 9 in the 1961 Convention. So should they do this, they would be compliant with the convention. And this is actually, you find in Malta's law, you find elements that are directly connected to this Article 2, Paragraph 9 of the Single Convention. It's the first country that mentioned this provision in its law. And we saw that the answer from the United Nations, as compared to Uruguay, that was labeled as a pirate country when they legalized, or Canada, where we had violent response from the UN saying that Canada is violating treaty law. We didn't have such a harsh response for Malta, and I think it has to do with this provision. Again, this year, 2 months ago, the INCB, so it's a United Nations body, they released a report criticizing all of the ways countries have legalized cannabis, saying all of these ways are against the convention, but they didn't criticize Malta's way, and they didn't even mention the one way which allows you to legalize, because obviously they oppose legalization, so they don't want to give the advice, but they didn't criticize it because there is no argument to criticize it. And just maybe to connect that on the EU, I think it's important to understand that and connect with the citizens' initiative that you mentioned. I'm part of a coalition of NGOs led by people in Italy that are trying to set up this European Citizens Initiative. But there is a problem, and it's, I think, the main problem, which is the fact that the Commission, we already had feedback from the legal services of the Commission, and it's something that is always happening. The European Commission is always playing in between two drastically opposed positions. One is the fact that cannabis regulation would fall under EU law, and therefore it's a prerogative of the European Union as a whole, Commission, Parliament, etc. And there is another position, which is a historical position, which is cannabis regulation and drug policy is fully member states' prerogative. It's a competence of member states, so we can't touch it, we can't deal with it. And so the European Commission is very, very used to choosing one position or the other, depending on the case. And when we try to make up a European Citizens Initiative, they will tell us, great idea, but unfortunately, this is not under the scope of our prerogatives. You have to go to member states. And then, on the other hand, we see that the European Union now is taking Hungary to the Court of Justice of the European Union for a question of cannabis. And because there are so many cases against Hungary, we have sort of it passed with the other cases of the European Commission against Hungary for many reasons that are often justified. But here the case is actually different because it's a move from the Commission to finally grab these prerogatives of drug policy. This is something that, again, it's very complex, but since the Lisbon Treaty, we have had some changes in EU law, which allows the Commission to take a bit more role in the game, and that's what they are trying to do in the medium term with this court case against Hungary. Yeah. So, in a way, this is, I think, a very important and the right moment to discuss this important topic. We have international treaties which allow legalization of cannabis, which are part of EU law. So EU law allows legalization of cannabis under these provisions. But insofar, in a couple of years, we will have a judgment of the Court of Justice, which will likely hand back more or confirm that the Commission has more prerogatives on drug policy making. Maybe in a couple of years, it would not be as easy for countries to legalize directly activating this provision under treaty law. Since only the countries have signed the single convention, only countries can say, I legalize under Article 2, Paragraph 9, just like Malta did. In a couple of years, maybe they will have to consult with the Commission, and that may make things more difficult. So I will only encourage countries to legalize as soon as possible before they are not anymore able to do it in full sovereignty.
Okay, let me jump now to Malta. You took a big step forward and were the first country legalizing cannabis. Cyrus, can you give us, you were close to the government, can you give us an insight on how was made this framework and how did it work to actually legalize it in Malta?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for having us here. I'll start with what was being said in the previous panel and the fact that you need to lobby politicians in order for them to start changing things. And I think during the past 10 years, that is what we have done in my country, where we elected a progressive government in 2013. And we have had 10 years of very bold changes when it comes to civil liberties and human rights. There has been this wave of liberties that started exactly in March 2013, and it has continued like 1 year after the next on different topics. Cannabis was one of those issues which we raised in our party before the elections, and we promised that if we were elected in government, we would start dialogue with citizens in order to see what would be the best way to, first of all, decriminalize cannabis, but then also move towards a model which would legalize the actual growing. We wanted a discussion first to see which would be the best route to take. Government started a consultation process a few years ago. As an office in the European Parliament, we participated in this consultation period and the consultation that the government was holding. And it was interesting because as an office, we suggested a model, and it was actually that model which actually then made it as the model chosen by Malta. The thought was, by my office, and I guess there were others, I don't think that we were the only ones who actually proposed this, but the thought was to, as Luke said in the previous panel, remove the idea of big companies making profits, etc., but go towards the individual. We wanted a human rights approach. We wanted to see that the individual that uses cannabis would be able to use cannabis without being hindered in doing so. And our proposal was to see a system which goes away from big pharma, which goes away from these big companies that end up making loads of money because people would be using a plant, basically. And we said that we should have a model which actually allows citizens to grow their own plants.
Yes.
Then, if there are people who can't grow their own plant, then they would be able to join a group of other people, and they pool their resources together and grow their plants together. And that is what happened. Now it's been a couple of years, and now we have the first step towards. So we've had a couple of years where citizens could grow their plants. They can grow up to 5 plants each, etc. And then now we're seeing the first, let's call them cannabis clubs, asking for registration. We have 7. On the day that registrations opened, we got 7. And they have started this process towards a number of people joining them and be able to pool resources together. Now, there has been quite a lot of discussion on why, for instance, the United Nations might not have found a problem with the Maltese system. I would say one of the biggest differences is that you cannot buy and sell at a profit, and therefore you cannot trade, and you cannot have cross-border trade of cannabis in the case of Malta.
You are answering my next question.
Okay.
Because some people say that social clubs are great and for patient success, for common people access that don't want to grow at home. But then there is also this problem of not having the commercial profit from selling cannabis, and that both models should exist. How do you feel about this in Malta?
Yeah, I must admit, at first, and that is why we put that paper in the consultation process, at first my thoughts were go only for the social club model. Now that it's functioning, I think that while it is a very good model, and while it is a model that actually gives freedom and human rights to the citizens who are using cannabis, there are some issues with it. And one of the issues that I would find is the fact that when it comes, for instance, Malta is a tourist destination. When tourists come there, obviously they cannot grow their own plant. Obviously, they cannot join a social club because they're not registered as residents of the country. So there are a number of challenges that we have in front of us. I think that soon we will need to discuss amending the law, making it better, learning from the past few years, and see how we should move forward. But I think one of the biggest satisfactions, at least for us, even as an office in the European Parliament, was that our proposal ended up becoming the law of the country. And then, apart from that, we were then consulted by Germany, for instance, who have adopted the same exact model, are in the process of adopting the same exact model that we have in our country. We spent the past year and a half speaking to German representatives, Bundestag elected people, to explain exactly what we thought. But of course, there is this problem of trade. And Germany, I think, is seeing this as one of its major obstacles. They wanted to go towards a full legalization model. However, they realized that if they go for a full legalization model, then they might be breaching not only European law, but also the United Nations Convention. So, and that is why they changed route when they were actually doing this. I think that, and I continue to answer also what was just said earlier on, we should not feel threatened by the European Commission. The current European Commission is made up of very conservative politicians, and we should be there to challenge them. And if there is a citizens' initiative, please, let's do it. NGOs, together with politicians in the European Parliament, we can push this forward.
Are you talking to Kenzi?
Yes, but we can push this forward. And while I know, and we all know, how the legal services of the Commission, how the Commission functions with a very conservative leader and very conservative politicians within it, but we are there to challenge these. And it takes politicians who are elected, directly elected politicians from the 27 member states to move forward changes that then the Commission would need to listen to. And I wouldn't give up right now. This is the time for change, as was said earlier on. So let's unite this together. We're doing this in the European Parliament. The interest group that we created came from nothing. You asked whether it was a taboo or not. It was a big taboo in the European Parliament to speak on cannabis till a few years ago, but we defied that. We actually went on and created an interest group. We have people from 5 different political groups in the European Parliament, and that was something which probably some people in the Commission never expected, but we still did it. So if we join forces together, we can challenge the Commission on this as well.
And also because cannabis industry is growing fast, and for instance, the tourism, cannabis-related tourism can be a billion industry business. And this leads me to Mikulas. Maybe you know, I don't know, the Minister of Health, the German Minister of Health, Karl Lauterbach, said that he had very good feedback from the European Commission on the legalization in Germany. Do you know what is he referring to? What was this feedback he had?
Well, I have to admit that in particular the feedback coming from the European Commission to Germany, I'm not aware at that point of time, but that's generally like illustrating the whole issue. I should probably at the beginning kind of like apologize for my late coming. Apparently 2 hours reserve for coming from Brussels to London by train is not really sufficient. and that illustrates how fragmented Europe it is, how crossing borders and how different legal systems are actually creating troubles. I mean, German approach is certainly different from the one we take in Czech Republic, or that's also differing from the one one can see in Malta. And we are effectively, all of us, we are trying different ways how to circumvent the obstacles that are currently existing in the European law. And yeah, I hope Germans were were successful in these tasks, but it's generally it's part of a general problem we are all facing. I mean, European Union by its design, it's adherent to UN Convention, and it's trying to implement it effectively in any single regulation that is in any way relevant. Which means what we will need to do in order to be able to legalize in Europe in proper way, we will need to change this whole approach and start legalization on the, let's say, European level to delete the problematic parts for whatsoever international treaties or internal regulations we are talking about. Shall I add few sentences on the Czech Republic?
Yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah, precisely. What was this biggest issue was precisely the UN Convention, maybe a bit more than the Schengen Agreement that is being discussed in that context in Germany, and the way how we try to circumvent it, or we are currently, to be precise, in the phase of process of preparing the legal text. So there is general conception, and now it shall be translated into precise legal text. It might be worth to mention the overall political situation in Czech Republic, because current composition of the parliament is actually very conservative. I mean, there is one liberal party, that's the Pirate Party, and all the others are effectively conservative or adhere to conservative values de facto. So putting forward a proposal is a bit tricky. So currently, as we see it, we should have been able to seek the majority, but there will be major compromises, which are of course subject of various criticisms coming from those who maybe expected more. Maybe the most important part of the proposal is actually capping for the consumption for particular consumer, which is also becoming controversial because it requires sort of like a registration. So far, we see it as, let's say, the only way or the only strategy that kind of like shall deliver in our context. Let's see what will be the outcome. We would like to change it through the legislative process, but we certainly need to find a support from the conservatives, which is not easy.
Yes, I see the situation in the Czech Republic a bit paradoxical, because some days we have news saying that the Czech Republic will legalize it soon, but the other day we had a journalist arrested and convicted of spreading, of disseminating and inciting drug consumption because he published it, and he's the editor-in-chief, Robert Weverke. He was just year before for publishing a cannabis specialized magazine. Then recently also we had some news about the trying to ban CBD and cannabinoids in food and supplements. So you just mentioned that the government might be conservative. How is this dichotomy in the Czech Republic, and how do you predict legalization? When could this happen in your country?
Yes, apparently it is a dichotomy, and it shall be perceived or understood in the context of the overall political situation is the Czech parliament is effectively, by means of like a composition, kind of similar to, let's say, Hungarian or Polish. Yeah, I mean, like the conservative forces, they dominated, and of course, I mean, that manifests quite often in the law. Yeah, I'm not really in particular big fan of the regulation that resulted exactly into this political process you have mentioned. However, this type of censorship still exists, and now it was enforced by sort of like sentence for that journalist. What is important, and you might find it paradoxical that there is this conservative liberal government, effectively like dominated by the conservative was with the Liberal Party, and for us actually the legalization is one of the top priorities. So we would like to deliver the law within 2 years before the next election. So let's say one of the most important, let's say, conditions for us to stay in the government and to continue in the cooperation. So I think that was recognized by the other parties, and therefore we should be probably be able to legalize. Despite that, clearly some of the parties in the government, like Christian Democrats, for example, are strongly opposing it.
Okay, thank you. I just got the sign. I need to finish, but I just wanted to make a last question, if I'm allowed. Kenzi, you are an independent analyst. You have studied a lot about laws. What do you believe is the best approach to legalize cannabis in Europe, the adult use in Europe?
Well, I would say the Malta way is probably the best way to start with Cannabis Social Club first, in order for the people that are already involved in the illicit cannabis market to have an easy way to legalize themselves. And then in the second step, you need to have a regular or a different sort of access, in particular for tourists or for people who just travel or are not willing to join a club or are consumer very occasionally. So this sort of progressive step is a good way to go. In Spain, they came up with a document that's called the 5 pillars. It says that ideal cannabis policy needs to have 5 pillars: medical, hemp, cannabis clubs, and self-production, legal market with dispensaries, and harm reduction and prevention as one important pillar. And I made a couple of years ago a report. I coordinated the working group, global working group. We worked during 2 years. We support cannabis and sustainable development, which analyzes under the framework of the Sustainable Development Agenda of the UN how we should regulate cannabis to achieve the goals of sustainable development. And actually, it recovers these 5 pillars. The 5 pillars that people in Spain came up with are the best model to go with, but it should be implemented progressively. So maybe first harm reduction and prevention, then the clubs and production at home, and then you go for the legal markets. The way to go legally, again, we have an important, and I'm sorry to take some time, but I think it's important to close. We have a lot of lawyers that are making a lot of money by helping people obtain licenses and this kind of things. Insofar internationally and in EU law, the legal regime for recreational cannabis is the same as hemp. You do not require licensing. You do not require, a priori, many of the things that you require for medical. Mm-hmm. So lawyers may lose a lot of money in the future if they advise this way. So that's why we have a lot of confusing elements coming from lawyers, in particular, talking about barriers in UN treaties, barriers in EU law, barriers in Schengen that do not exist. There is no legal barrier in Schengen agreements. We have actually the opposite. Schengen says if you have legal trade in controlled substances, whatever the use, if you have legal trade, you need to advise each country and monitor it. So it doesn't say it's prohibited, it says you have to monitor it, and every country has to know if there is trade between borders. We have a single market. if I legalize cannabis in a country and I legalize it in another country, in Germany and in Czech Republic, there is no reason to have trade impeded. To the contrary, the normal thing would be to have a free trade in cannabis between these two countries, and it would actually be difficult to impede free trade. So I think we should look at the legal provision with more attention and without the lobbies of some people that want more complexity. I think, as you said before, cannabis should be like wine with some barriers, some regulation, obviously, a lot of prevention, but not crazy complexities that do not come from any legal grounds and only serve a few.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel that this could be a much longer conversation, but we can't. We really need to finish. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, you can reach out to the speakers after this panel. Thank you.